Everyone, it's Gordon Einstein, and welcome to the kickoff or inaugural edition of Future Talk. Future Talk is a new video interview series that is supported by the AIBC conference or summit out of beautiful Malta, but soon to be in Dubai. I want to thank AIBC for helping us come up with this idea and supporting it and distributing it. It shows their dedication, of course, to artificial intelligence and blockchain. And for our first show, I thought there'd be no one better than to kick this off than my existing friend and new friend, Professor Wulf Kaal, and new friend, if I can be so bold, Craig Calcaterra, Professor Craig Calcaterra. I want to welcome you both. They are co-authors of a new book called Decentralization. I'm happy to say I have bought their new book and have started to read it, and it's quite good. So, gentlemen, welcome to the very first show ever, or first episode ever of Future Talk.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Gordon. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Before we dive into the book in detail, can we, from each one of you, get a little bit of your background, what your interests are, what you're involved in, and how you met each other? I know you've done work together in the past, and it's led to a lot of things coming up to the book. I guess, Wulf, I'll start off with you. Just give us the Professor Wulf Kaal origin tale, like the Wolverine.
Yeah, so my background is in institutional economics. So my PhD supervisor was one of the leading new institutional economists out of Europe. Some of his peers are Oliver Williamson, Douglas North, Rudolf Richter, among several others. And so when I studied, I was always under his tutelage. I was very influenced by this framework of how do you create institutions. And of course, in those days, in my PhD days, we didn't have the technology that we have today, right? So governance and institutions, and so my PhD supervisor and I were both economists and lawyers, fully trained in both. And so there was a quest that in my PhD years were with me, and long story short, I met Craig in the midst of teaching a course on disruptive innovation, and in the legal context. And Craig's wife was a PhD student who was in my course, and I spoke about the need for technical people to talk to legal people in order to upgrade institutional design, among other things, right? And then so she told Craig, and a few days later, Craig showed up, and he and I started talking, and Craig didn't quite trust me for a while, right? So he's a very careful person, Craig Calcaterra. And so I said, yeah, I want to write this article about decentralized jurisdiction, or distributed jurisdiction at the time, right? Where I said, well, there's a legal perspective on these new technologies that nobody knows about and nobody understands, and I want to write this article. And so Craig said, well, what is this, you know? And then I sent Craig the Aragon paper, and I think that kind of kicked us off, Craig, right? If you want to do a quick introduction as well.
Sure. Yeah, my background is that I'm a mathematician, and my area of interest is abstract dynamical systems, which means models, mathematical models that describe scientific situations that are really complex. So dynamics means things like stochastic dynamical systems, differential equations, things that describe how rockets get to the moon, how quantum mechanics are modeled, how the stock market is modeled. So my area of interest is really broad, but also very specific. And I like to get into the nuts and bolts of things. And so when I was introduced to Wulf by my wife, it was really maybe it's a midlife crisis or something like that happened. What was it, 4 years ago now? And I jumped out of the academic ivory tower into the muck of real life and business and law and that sort of thing. And it's been a pleasure, an opportunity to really expand my understanding of the world.
And I'm going to tease something out a little bit. When Wulf says you didn't trust him at first, I presume that doesn't mean like an ethical trust, but did you was it, you weren't sure if your intellectual ways of thinking matched, or what does that mean?
Yeah, for me, I guess I would definitely never put it so undiplomatically as
That's my
that.
job.
Right. Um, I would say it's, as an academic, as a purist, that sort of thing. It's like he's always pushing me to deal with the real world, that sort of thing, instead of the cute abstract models that I'm much more comfortable in.
Interesting. No, I mean, and that's, I can see that being a very productive relationship because, you know, at least I always find that the most generative or productive moment is when you take potentially opposing ideas and attempt to reconcile them, and they force you to come up with something new. So, you know,
That
when you're stuck in this camp or stuck in this camp, you don't get that frisson, if you like. And sometimes it can be very productive, even if it's stressful.
I think that's really well said, but there's also the angle that the problems of our modern world are diverse and broad, and everybody who's an expert is like so narrowly focused, and so it really demands that people from disparate areas somehow collaborate and figure out how to model something really deep and broad that's a global issue.
Got it. So you both have this parallel interest in institutions. When you say that my undergraduate years kick in, I think I'm at Max Weber and the whole idea of a bureaucracy, but I think you're saying something a little bit beyond that when you use the term institutions, I think. How do you, can you define that category?
Well, as a abstract thinker, I'm thinking you're right. More broadly, an institution is anything that builds up around a law, and a law is anything that builds up around a tradition, anything that helps organize people. And that's what our actual focus is on the book of decentralization, is trying to figure out what is the nature of organization. Is it centralized organization? Is the things that we're most used to. It's the way that the world works right now. It's the way the entire global system is organized from deep history. And so the question is, how do we actually need to organize the coming future institutions, the coming future way that we're going to interact with each other socially?
Yeah, so
well, please go ahead.
To add to that, so from an institutional economist perspective, so the rules of the game, any instantiation of the rules of a game are an institution, right? In the broadest possible sense. So if we want to define it.
Any instantiation of the rules of the game make an institution. Interesting. Because my next question was going to be, how do you distinguish between an organization and an institution? But I think you're kind of saying that the institution is a manifestation of some underlying set of rules, and the organization isn't necessarily that. Am I hearing you correctly?
Organization is broader and involves the inner workings. The institution, the definition of institution itself is just the framework around the rules of the game that a group of people engages with, right? In the broadest sense.
Got it. And I love that with our first future talk, we've literally just jumped off the deep end into some intellectual stuff, and it's just like we didn't start in the minor leagues. We just went right for it. So one thing we discussed sort of before the show started is, and Craig, you were alluding to this, the effect that technology is having on the efficacy of and the trust in current institutions and the way those institutions are set up. Can you, I guess I'll start, Craig, I'll start with you, but Ben, both of you please chime in. Can you explain that idea and expand upon that idea?
Sure. It's hard for me not to get apocalyptic about this issue. And what I mean is quite technical. When we just look at the changes in our institutions, changes in our systems, the way that people use social media right now is starting to uncover new understandings about each other. We're starting to realize things. We're starting to see things that we haven't seen before. And that's what apocalypse means. I don't mean it in a religious overtones thing necessarily. Apocalypse, just its etymology means uncovering. It's the same as discovery. It's the same as revelation. It means taking the blanket off of something so you can now see underneath things. And that's what our social media is doing. We're having more access to body cams on police is what's happening right now with me in Minneapolis. We're under lockdown right now. First time I've ever been in lockdown in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Society is changing quickly.
Now let me ask you. I'm gonna be a little bit of conspiracy theorist. Are we social media uncovering like a truth that was hidden, or is it creating this sort of QAnon alternative reality that may or may not be true, but it's just becoming our truth?
I think QAnon can thrive because so many discoveries are happening right now that weren't established before. In a democracy, you need transparency, and yet before, with the information technology we had, there were silos of information that were much deeper and narrower. There were several different silos all over the place throughout society. And now, basically, information technology is allowing us to see across society and deeper in society. So uncovering, meaning it's no longer hidden, exactly. But not in some conspiracy theory sort of way. It's just information technology has allowed us to transmit information, process information, and store information so much more cheaply, so that now everybody has access to anything they want to see compared to in the past. When we first were creating the institutions that we now enjoy, the information technology was quite simply, we'd use goose feathers on sheepskin. That's what parchment is. That's what our Declaration of Independence in the United States was about, was written on. That's what the Constitution is written on. And now our information technology takes those exact same rules that we're still under for those institutions. And if I want to talk about those rules or process those rules or transmit those rules, I use a magical little cell phone in my pocket that speaks with satellites. So there's a big difference between that information technology from a very practical level. And it's had a gigantic change. The information processing power that we have right now is I can talk to everybody on the planet. I can process all their information, and algorithms can distill that information so that we can understand what's happening everywhere. And so the 6 degrees of separation that was true in the 1960s is now 2 degrees of separation between every person on the planet. I interact with
I know that so all the Nigerians emailing me, letting me know that I have money. They're just I can trust them because they're only 2 degrees away, right?
That's a major problem, is that with this new information technology, our institutions are not built to cope with it. And so we can't process that information properly. We don't have good systems, good institutions that were built to properly filter that information.
Well, let me throw this at you. I accept the idea that information is broken out of its silos, and now it's all available. But I'll throw something else at you. Just like we said before, the collaboration between you and Wulf, these sort of new things mixing together produces something new. I'd say that breaking the information out of the silos is creating these new kind of combinant ideas that couldn't have existed before because it was impossible to know a lot of both multiple fields. So it's not just that new information is becoming available, it's that new information is created by the combination of newly freed information. So you got this combinatorial issue beyond just the revelation issue.
Absolutely. And what are we going to do about it?
I don't know. That's why you guys are on the show. I don't know.
Exactly. We need to actually address it. And our old institutions are not built to address it. So we can't rely on the way that they're built. We need to revitalize them. We need to recreate these systems. We don't want to lose the wonderful gains of history that we're at. We're in a marvelous new spot that allowed this new information technology regime.
Right.
So don't just abandon all the institutions that got us here, but they need to be refixed. They need to be fixed.
Yeah. So maybe in this context, it's time to talk a little bit about what this technology has done in society. And Craig alluded to a lot of this. So basically, what we're witnessing, in my mind, is bringing in information from the edges of society through technology, social media, among others, that just haven't existed before, right? And it's the creation, if you want, of the decentralized mob. The technology sets up networks that didn't exist before, but they're not coordinated, right? Because society is built around institutions, that rules of the game, right? In centralized structures that haven't existed before. At the same time, the technology using some decentralized metrics is also freeing society, bringing information from the edges, but it's not filtered into the existing institutional infrastructures and governance, right? So the question becomes, if that's true, how do you take the decentralized mob and put it on a, if you want, a pedestal, or put it into an institutional framework, again, the rules of the game, right? So how do you create rules of the game for the decentralized mob? And I call it a mob intentionally, because without that governance that Craig and I are talking about in the book, it is a mob. It is unruly, right? So the question becomes,
sorry, by definition, unruly. Like you're talking about, if there's rules of the game and the rules don't apply to the people, by definition, they're unruly.
Correct. But the question is, can this new, let's call it institution, right? I would call it institution. Can this new institution be sustainable without a framework of governance, decentralized governance, right? That plugs into the very origin of its genesis, if you want, right? That's what we're talking about. And maybe Craig, you want to, if you're so inclined, if you want to talk about this idea of how you create this rule set, but not disrupt the decentralized power that comes out of this technology, right? Which is what most people in law, so my esteemed colleagues, right? All we do as lawyers and governance people who are in governance, all they talk about is going back to the old ways, creating fiduciary duties for programmers, for developers, right? To force them into this existing structure that they are comfortable with. And every time you do that, you're stripping the entire power off of this new institution. And I'm very concerned about that. I'm getting emotional when I hear my colleagues talk about this.
Can I point something out?
There are better ways.
If I'm hearing this correctly, you two come at this from exactly opposite angles and are meeting a productive middle. I think I'm hearing Craig say that the old institutions can't be trashed. They need to be maintained. That value needs to be preserved. They need to be somehow retrofitted, updated, reformed, something, so that they can work in this new environment. And I think Wulf, I think I'm hearing you say that decentralization is the future, if not the present. And the question is, how do we bring institutional-like characteristics to it? It's almost like you're hitting, if I hear you correctly, you're two opposite poles kind of fighting towards each other.
No. So if I may synthesize this a little bit.
Sure.
So Craig is talking about the existing decentralized initiatives in society that can be preserved and upgraded with new institutional governance, right? What I'm talking about is the existing centralized top-down approaches that people are used to, that they try to imprint on this new technology, right? So those are two different perspectives on the same thing. Craig, if you want to.
Yeah, I would actually agree with Gordon that there are two perspectives on this, though. That there are. So to me, I do have this dichotomy approach to it. That's partly what the book is about: decentralization versus centralization. So we have a lot of centralized institutions, and centralization is about finding this hierarchical structure that evolves and eventually becomes having a single ruler at the top who runs top down. Mm-hmm. And all the levers of power are clear, and in the organizational structure, it's crystalline, it's fixed, that sort of thing. That's what centralization is versus decentralization, where you have a much flatter structure, a flatter organization where more people are all equal. And so what's happened in our society throughout history, if we look at the beginning of America, its goal was to stop being the hierarchical structure of the English aristocracy, mm-hmm. right? And that we would try to eliminate the problems that came from that situation. And we would actually have a decentralized structure. We'd have more freedom. We'd have a flatter system. And the problem with that was that it didn't work very well in the Articles of Confederation. I feel like I'm getting off on a pretty
No,
far
I
off.
mean, I'm
Be careful, Craig.
Yeah. We can finish it. I'm like, this is explained in a full chapter of the book.
But actually, you know what? Let me kind of seize on that, just because again, it's a short format show, and I love this stuff. And
Yeah.
you know, I just to give, you know, I read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers for fun. You know,
I quote them several times in the book, just so you know, and I love them.
I'm with you. So here, let's do it like this. You two have had a great collaboration. You've worked on many things. This book itself, the moment when you decided to do this book was, tell us about that. Either way.
So I can do it. Okay, so
Yeah, well,
we wrote a bunch of papers
Mhm.
that where Craig and I let's say found each other, or you know, he taught me, I taught him, and it was very, very productive. So sometimes he would disappear for a while and come up with this brilliant new structure.
Mhm.
And then I would start thinking about it, and we would be in a meeting, and I would say, hey, this needs to have a stable coin environment to make it work, right? So then there would be constant feedbacks on different intellectual feedbacks on different ideas. The problem is we're two academics who sit in the ivory tower, and we are not writing in a way that is conducive to a public debate about decentralization. And so I have always said to Craig, people don't understand what we're saying. We need to be able to bring it down substantially, not a notch, 10 notches, right? And so I've always said we need to tell stories. Storytelling is the way to get to people's hearts and minds and try to get them to see that there is something that improves the common good for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this book was born out of this idea. We didn't know if we could get a book contract, but surprisingly, well, for us, it was great that there are these scouts out there that read our articles that were out in the public on the internet, right? And so we had several conversations with book publishers, and you know, I took the lead on this. I said, Craig, we can get this. Let me bring it down a notch, and I wrote a very, you know, now it seems like a childlike outline of what we're trying to do, and they took the outline, right? So and so we could get started. Now, having said that, Craig, this book is still, I always say that this book is still pretty academic, right? So
it's not light reading. I'll say it for me,
Yeah.
and Wolf, I've had many conversations with you, and I'm learning a lot, but it's a slow feast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're struggling with it, because it does take a bit of effort. But just to answer the same question that Wolf was answering, like, how did we start this book? We've been working in cryptocurrency, crypto economy problems for several years. And we were both just noticing some consistent problems that were had in the audiences, in the communities, in the networks, that there was not a coherent framework. There was not a coherent philosophy. There was not a coherent understanding of all the potentials of decentralized technology, peer-to-peer technologies, for revitalizing democracy, basically, for improving these institutions that I'm so concerned about and so concerned with because of the changes in the information technology regime. And so that's what the book is there, is to actually crystallize a key seed idea for explaining how we can actually use this new technology to solve the existing and evolving and developing social ills that are going to come from the current technology. The way forward with this technology is not to quit social media or eliminate the new business opportunities that we have that unite transnationally. We have to move forward. When we have to continue to use this technology, the people who abandon it will just be forgotten. And so we need to use it wisely. And that's what the book is truly about, is how to properly institute these new decentralized organizational structures.
Interesting. Now let me throw this question to you. Are these new technologies always decentralizing, or is there any centralizing aspect to what's coming?
It's extremely dangerous because we're watching a divergence between the two different approaches to it. China is using the exact same information technology of information processing, storage, and transmission to create their social credit system. It's basically an Orwellian nightmare from the Western perspective. But they are actually keeping track of each person's history and giving them a social credit score of how good of a citizen they are. And it determines whether or not their children can go to school at certain places or whether they can travel within or outside of a province, depending on whether or not their automated algorithmic score is high enough. So that's a centralized way to use this technology that is absolutely being used here in America as well, with accidentally. Basically, if our institutions don't start using this technology, if our democratic institutions don't improve and revitalize themselves, well, already we're seeing basically corporate structures using it much more quickly. That's the idea.
I would even say that cancel culture is a manifestation of a Chinese-like social credit system, just with a different value set.
Because it's unregulated on Twitter and that sort of thing. Basically, we have these systems that aren't properly designed, or they're designed for a different goal than social improvement.
Or are they even designed? I mean, or is this like an emergent characteristic or quality?
It's an emergent characteristic coming from the fact that Twitter doesn't care whether or not it's improving the social network in some in the values that other people care about. Their value is to profit, and I have zero problem with that whatsoever. It makes a lot of sense. But because that's their system, there's going to be emergent properties that come out of that aren't in alignment with anything besides making sure that Twitter profits off of the clicks.
Fair enough. Now, Wulf, let me throw this at you. One of your passions, recurring themes, intellectual focus is on reputation and how that, if I understand you correctly, and I'm going to give you lots of time to explain it, how that's a potential solution for many of the problems that you two are seeing and are trying to address. Can you talk about what you mean when you say reputation and the role you see it playing?
Yeah. So,
yeah. No, go ahead, Wulf.
No, Craig, go ahead.
Actually, hold on. I'm going to assert interviewer privilege and throw that at Wulf. So, Wulf, go.
So, what do we think about when we talk about reputation today? And Gordon, Craig and I, it was very hard to talk about reputation, right? Because it's so intangible. It's so many people have different views on what reputation really means, what the underlying values are, and how people think about it generically, right? So what is reputation? Reputation is something that is organically built based on a community appreciation of a given person's value add to that community, right? But how is it created? How is it scored in society without technology, right? And it's not. It's something that you don't score. That is sort of hovering over you and is associated with you in a given social setting, right? But there are no rules when we talk about, as institutional economists, when we talk about reputation, which institutional economists typically don't. There are no rules of the game that are associated with reputation, right? At the same time, it very clearly is the foundation for an institutional framework if you use reputation as the linchpin to a governance system, which nobody has done, right? That it just doesn't exist. Reputation has never been. Well,
can we say nobody now, since you and I are working on something?
Well, okay, so sorry, I'm speaking historically, right?
Right.
And it's extremely important, but you mentioned it, Gordon, it's extremely important to experiment with governance design that revolve around reputation, because we all don't know. The book gives a vision that I, of course, wholeheartedly agree with, but the book has not collected data on people operating in this vision, in this environment. And if you build it impurely or purely, you collect different data on how people act in this incentive design environment. And we need to look at this data, compare it, and figure out if there are hidden incentives, if people actually act the way the model describes it or not, if they act in this way in a pure design versus a non-pure diluted hybrid design, right? And which is better, which survives, can it survive? So Craig has very clear visions as a mathematician for this, and I'll let you talk now, Craig. Sorry, I didn't mean to take
Well, actually, I'm going to say there's another possibility there, which is maybe it's not just that there's hidden incentives, maybe that there's hidden aspects to human nature that we don't see, and then we know the incentives, but then people respond in a way that we did not expect.
Correct, but we need to collect that data. We need this experimentation to flourish, and we need to stop. And we have this, and I haven't spoken to you about this enough. We already have people saying, "Oh, I want to do one person, one vote in a DAO environment." Like, I don't want to collect data on that. It's pointless. I have millions of data points, trillions of data points on the old system. Why would I want to waste my time collecting that data? And I'm more, sorry, Craig.
Let me be controversial for a second, and then you can shoot it down. There may be a little bit of the medium being the message here, which is when you have the one person, one vote in a DAO, it may have different characteristics than in regular space. Do you allow for that possibility?
Let Craig talk. Craig knows it all.
All right, Craig.
So there's two different things I guess I'll try to weave together here. We have the one person, one vote, flat democracy that you guys are talking about in a DAO, in a decentralized autonomous organization, for people who aren't up on the buzzwords from crypto technology, right? Yeah, how much are you expecting your audience to understand of these things like DAO and the decentralized autonomous?
I'll break the fourth wall here. My audience is super sharp and awesome. All of you watching this, you are super sharp and you're super awesome. No, I mean, it's a sophisticated audience that would care about artificial intelligence, blockchain, international governance. I mean, that is the attendee set for AIBC. Those are the people that my other shows attract. Those are the people I work with. I mean, people are generally going to understand DAOs and understand that you need some kind of governance, and it's a very strong challenge right now in the sense that since DAOs are not legally recognized and you don't have this sort of ecological ambient law that you can operate against, and you don't have to fill in every little detail. I mean, really, there's no law governing DAOs other than the smart contracts of the DAO. I mean, each one is sui generis. So this is a constant challenge in a way that figuring out Delaware corporate law isn't. And we're all wrestling with it. And I think that's why what you two are doing is so fantastically valuable, and why, I'll give you a plug. I mean, you guys say you took it down 10 notches. Well, you're still 20 notches above everyone else. And these are ideas that need to get explored and get handled. And I think I appreciate Wulf's idea that you're not saying you have the perfect system. You're trying to create scenarios so you can extract knowledge or information from those. So create knowledge about, to shine a light forward about how to proceed in the future. I don't think you're claiming, it was interesting. I don't think I heard you claim perfection. I think I heard you claim the need to create scenarios in this new environment so as to be able to observe what's going on and adjust course, is what I think I heard. But
right. So I guess let me then talk about, this is a central issue of governance, of how do you actually guide. So what is even governance? Again, I go back to the most important book in my library is the dictionary of like, what does governance mean? And its etymology it comes from the Greek word kubernetes, kubernos, and it means to guide, to steer. Okay, basically the tiller on a ship governs the ship and it guides it. And just a slight change in the till will change the direction of the ship in the long term. And so the best governance is the smallest governance, but it needs to be there. You need to actually create some system that has some human element in it. It's a major concern for me about Bitcoin and all the other systems, is they're not designed with good long-term governance strategies. And so in the long term, they're going to wreck that ship. unless they add some sort of system. And it's very hard to add this system after the ship has been built and it's running.
These are why my shows get up to 2 hours, because I got to jump in. Some people view the fossilized nature of Bitcoin, its governance and ability to evolve, the fact that it's fantastically difficult as a feature, not a bug, because it prevents people from wrecking it. It's like, you know, there's maybe a little benefit of it being a singleton that's not subject to change by the little minions. And we all maybe can, you know, if you look at the dollar declining in value, maybe that ossified governance structure or non-governance of Bitcoin is a good thing. Maybe that's the US that could never have gotten off the gold standard. You know.
Right. The minimal government. The minimum governance feature, the very small governance feature, is the goal. It's the long-term goal of any system, of any network of people. But to start off from the beginning of enforcing that there's going to be zero governance is not a good system. Basically, then the governance was from Satoshi. And that's not entirely true. There's a simplified cartoon version of the governance structure of Bitcoin. It actually has a non-transparent governance structure. And so if you actually analyze what's going on, it's quite a bit worse than the democratic approach that we had achieved back in 1789, right? And so
that should be paper, by the way, if it's not already.
Right.
You know, the Bitcoin's kitchen cabinet, or however you want to say it.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the issue that I'm trying to actually bring together is the idea that you need governance, and how do you achieve governance in a decentralized structure. We want to add in reputation. It is part of the answer to this. That is the solution, as well as we want a democratic system, right? You want it's required as democracy, because in a decentralized structure like Bitcoin, it demands that every single person that is an open network everybody has an opportunity to contribute or not, and it has to be absolutely transparent if it's going to be decentralized. Every single person has to be able to see the code all the way through it. If you're going to run it, you have to trust that it runs well. If nobody's in charge, then everybody's in charge. And so that requires a democratic structure of some type. And right now it's a hidden oligarchy of super users who run through email lists is what's going on with both the major networks. The only ones that really, really matter right now are Bitcoin and Ethereum. Far down the list, Ethereum.
Interesting. Guys, you know what? I'm gonna have to call it because of time, but you know, these topics are, of course, explored in your book. We'll include in the show notes links to purchase it on Amazon. I personally think the Kindle version is cool, but there's a paperback version also. There's different versions. Yes, Wulf? Your publisher was nice enough to do multimodal, I guess?
Yeah, we had to push a little bit, but we got 2 different versions. There's one that kills trees and the other one doesn't.
It kills electrons, right? No, I'm just kidding. And you know, again, I want to thank AIBC for putting this all together, guys. This is a good way to start the series. That was deep. That was a lot going on there. I have no idea. I feel sorry for my editor because I have no idea where he's going to cut. But you know what? That's his problem. So I want to thank you both so much for your time. I know you're both really busy, and that was a lot of insightful and very interesting conversation. So
thank you, Gordon, for doing this.